Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. Once upon a midnight dreary. Those famous words were penned in the 1800s by a man many considered to be the founder of the horror genre. Tonight, thanks to the magic of television, that man is with us tonight, and thanks to a grant to the Bushnell from the National Endowment for the Arts, he's going to be making appearances throughout Connecticut in the weeks ahead. Please join me in this wonderful occasion of meeting himself, Edgar Allan Poe. Thanks, Mr. Poe, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Christian.
I understand that, here we are in 2009, and you are celebrating a milestone birthday. I was looking up some information, and you were born January 19th, 1809. That makes you 200 years old.
Yes, that's correct.
You look wonderful.
Well, thank you. That's very flattering.
Now, popular culture has been very good to you. Are you aware that there is an award called the Edgar that is given to mystery writers that's named for you?
I think despite the circumstances, I'm more aware of it than others might think I am. I'm a little disappointed that they call it mystery writing now, because originally when I wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue with Auguste Dupin as my mystery solver, I guess, I called it the ratiocination stories because the characters used rational thinking to puzzle out what happened and then come to a conclusion. If you call it a mystery story, I would assume that means that it's never solved because it's a mystery. But if they want to call it a mystery story and name it after me, then fine.
Interesting, very interesting. So you wrote stories focusing on the rational mind, and yet I think of your stories mostly as focusing on the mind gone mad.
Well, you're thinking of what I believe have become my most popular stories. I wrote a great deal in my lifetime. I was mostly known as a critic, a literary critic, and of course my first love was poetry. But I had the idea of coming up with this person who was smarter than your average person because he thought more clearly and he wasn't clouded by emotion or by just randomness, and so he could focus and come up with rational ideas. And so he rationed out how to solve these murders. And then of course I went on and wrote him again in the Purloined Letter, and it was very popular. And today I believe it's thought that I revolutionized the mystery story, if you have to call it that. Although they were around before my writings, I gave the world what would be considered the modern mystery story.
Oh, yes. Now, I know today, in fact, I just finished a wonderful suspense story last night called The Angel by Carla Neggers, and I was up until 2 a.m. because of that whole element of suspense in the story. So from a modern perspective, from today, in today's popular culture, all those things macabre and mysterious and suspenseful, many of those trace back to you. But it wasn't always that way, was it? I mean, I think back to, who was it? Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, let me find it here, you were publishing in the mid-1800s, and
yes.
He called you a second-rate poet.
Admittedly, Emerson and I had an infamous level of professional relationship. He was a member of what were known as the Transcendentalists, who were focused at that time right around Boston. And I believe today you would probably know them more as hippies. And I can only say that I wish I could have bricked him up behind a wall after luring him there with a tree to hug.
Oh, okay. And I wish he were here tonight too, so that we could see all of this in action. But I guess what I keep coming to is, I think about how popular you are today, and I think about what things were like for you then, and in many ways you were unappreciated, and in some circles absolutely ignored, which I think is a horrible thing. And yet at the same time, we look over in Europe, and there's George Bernard Shaw, who is saying that you were the finest of fine artists. Now, were the Europeans so different from us in their literary likes? What do you think was the reason that they loved you so much and here in this country not so much? Or was it just a matter of, whatever's in our backyard is, taken for granted?
Well, there's certainly different tastes and different palates, and I would understand that completely. But at the time, part of it was for business reasons. In America, well, there was no international copyright at the time. So for American publishers, they could publish a European writer for free. They didn't have to pay any royalties. And so European writers were published left and right, and American writers struggled just to get a few words in and be paid for it and be able to eat from what they were paid. And the same is true in Europe. They could publish American writers for free and not give any royalties to us, and they could publish freely and pass along all of our works, and we didn't get anything from that either. So for one, it was easier to get European writers here, and it was easier for them to get American writers at that time. But at the same time, there was more respect for European writers because America was still young, and it was felt that the education was better, the world experience was more interesting than what was going on here. And one of my lifelong ambitions, truly the lifelong ambition I had in my adult life, was to publish a literary magazine called, at first The Pen, and later I renamed it The Stylus, that would feature American writers and would bring attention to poets, poetesses, and other writers that we had here. And I tried very hard to do that, and at one point I even owned a magazine myself for a short period of time, but I was unable to make the business work, and I just never could get it off the ground.
Edgar, that story has been replicated many, many times today as well. There's something called electronic publishing now. You would be amazed at what's going on in that whole world. I'll have to tell you about that a little bit later, but I want to talk a little more about your life. I did a little investigating before you came to the show tonight, and looking at some of the things going on in your childhood, my gosh, you had an awful childhood. I'm not looking, well, yes I am. I do want to bring up the unpleasantness and the sadness. Could you tell us a little about your childhood?
If it's the price of literary prestige to have the childhood that I had, I wish I was a baker. My mother died when I was 2. I had an older brother and a younger sister. My father, I believe, died shortly after that, although I heard rumors that he had ran off. The family was broken up. I was sent to live with distant relatives in Virginia. My younger sister was sent to live with relatives in New York, and my brother to Baltimore. And so there was no family at that time. However, I don't remember my mother at all. I have information about her that she was a wonderful actress and that she was extremely beautiful. But my mother at that point became the wife of John Allan, my protective father figure and family, although I was never actually adopted into the family. And I had what I could say is a happy life while growing up with the Allans and with their children. But in my later teen years, Mr. Allan and I had a falling out, which grew worse and worse as I grew older and we grew apart, and he didn't want to take responsibility for his child because I was not his child. And so despite that he was a successful businessman, he cut me out of the will, and he didn't tell me when his wife, my adoptive mother, died. And so I lost 2 mothers at that point. I was unable to see her until after her death. I made it back for the funeral. And after that, Mr. Allan and I never spoke again. And so there have been many losses along the ways, but I was also able to form a new family out of friends and colleagues in the publishing world.
Do you find, when you're now able to look back at the body of your work, that the experiences in your life became, grist for the mill?
An artist doesn't work in a vacuum, obviously. And so any level of life influence is sure to show up in their works, whatever those works may be. And so I would understand that could be seen in my work, but at the same time I was influenced by other writers, by other poets, and influenced by the works that were around me, and also just by being in nature and understanding what it meant to be human. And so I could understand that someone might see that in my works, but it's certainly not going to inform every single line.
I understand it, and I think that's a healthy answer. Now, Edgar, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am. And because you're here tonight, and if you're just joining us, this is page 1, and my guest tonight is Edgar Allan Poe. He is celebrating his 200th birthday, and we'll be celebrating throughout the state with many opportunities to talk about his work thanks to the Bushnell and a grant that the Bushnell received from the National Endowment for the Arts. I'll tell you more about that later, but right now I'm going to take advantage of the fact that he's here. Your poem, The Raven.
Yes.
One of the most beloved, scary, but one that many people know and love. And I would ask respectfully if you would share that with us tonight.
Oh, certainly. I would be happy to.
Thank you. Okay. Stage is yours.
The Raven. Once, upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over a many quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for that rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came tapping, and so faintly you came rapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the ancient days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast above the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, from whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I willed a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press. Ah, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee. Respite, respite and nepenthe, from my memories of her Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. Whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, by this home, by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore. Is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. By that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thine beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Mr. Poe, that was moving, illuminating, entertaining, and I could go on. And I must tell you, here on page 1, I always have a tradition that when the guest is a writer, I always ask the writer to read page 1 from whatever the current work is. I'm so pleased that you agreed to share the entire piece with us. And I'm reminded that The Raven was published in, I believe, 1845
Yes.
by the New York Evening Mirror. And that poem went a long way to making you famous. And yet at the same time, while the publishing world finally gave you some recognition, your wife was dying.
Yes. I was writing the poem when Virginia and her mother, Miss Clem, and I were living in New York State. And Virginia had been ailing for quite some time. She broke a blood vessel in her throat while singing. And she was very delicate, and over a long period of time, her health declined, improved, declined. I had hope, we had sorrow, and at the time of writing this, she was declining. It would be incorrect to say that that's the only thing that informed the poem, because the death of a beautiful woman is one of the most darkly inspiring subjects I think anyone could write about. But the sorrow that comes with it can truly take over one's life. She was with me. She saw the success that I had from The Raven and the fame that came along with it, although there was no real monetary support that came along with it either, and so I was unable to take care of her in her last days. Friends donated quite a bit to us, and we were able to make her comfortable, and she passed away shortly after this was published.
Mr. Poe, speaking of such things, well, first, do you mind if I call you Edgar? I know I did earlier.
Sure, that's fine.
Well, Edgar, now that you mentioned about, you brought up finances, I know that the end of your life was, well, according to the records, you died penniless. According to the records, you were a drunk and they found you dead in a gutter. Comment?
I was at my wit's end at that time. This was after Virginia had passed away. I had attempted to bring my life back together, and Miss Clem continued to live with me, and she was wonderfully supportive. I made contacts through the literary world, again, to float the idea of the literary magazine, and I thought that there was some hope there. But I had been feeling ill, and a number of emotional incidents occurred that pushed me to my limit. I was on my way back to Virginia, and I ended up in Baltimore, and things weren't very clear at that time. And I was found babbling in a gutter at that point, wearing another man's clothes. And despite the many, many, many rumors over what happened, no one knows what happened. I lasted a few days in the hospital, and a cousin who lived in the city spent that time with me. And he investigated where I had been and where my belongings were and where a trunk of my writings were, and he wasn't able to turn up anything. So what anyone might say of where I was prior to that or what I had been doing, they don't know. And that has been lost to history. But I'm happy to live on through my work.
And I'm very happy that you live on through your work as well. In fact, it's because of your work, the wonderful body of work, the stories as well as the poetry, that the Bushnell, in receiving the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, you'd be very pleased to know that that organization exists now, gave the Bushnell a grant. We chose you and your work, and I understand that as long as time permits, you're going to be appearing at several libraries throughout the state, quite a few libraries, to talk about your work, to share much of what you shared tonight, and be able to answer some questions from those in the audience. You're also going to appear on October 23rd at the Dead Poet Slam for middle and high school students. We're dispensing with a number of the ordinary slam rules, so if you are a middle or high school student and you have a poem that you would like to read, you don't have to memorize, you can come down to the Bushnell that night. It's come in and sign up. It's all free.
Wonderful.
All of the library lectures are also free. And October 31st, Halloween, all day at the Bushnell, 10 in the morning till 5 at night, a conference called Boo at the Bushnell. We're going to be exploring the evolution of the horror genre, for which many credit you as founding, but we're going to explore the evolution in theater and film and literature, have a whole lineup of guest speakers, and we're also going to have a showing of the movie The Fall of the House of Usher, based on one of your most famous stories, starring Vincent Price. You would have really liked him. That, too, is totally free. And then let's see, on November 3rd, also at the Bushnell, a blood drive. We're asking all of vampires, I know you're familiar with some vampires, to give back, time to give back. And for those who do come down, they will also get a chance to meet you and Dracula. And as long as our supply holds out, we're going to give the blood donors a copy of one of the collections of your book. This is one published by Simon & Schuster, 406 pages, with all sorts of copious notes and discussion ideas, and it's going to be free as long as we have them to the blood donors. Also, I do want to mention the first 200 people who come through the door on October 31st for the conference, not who register, but who come through the door, will also receive a copy of a collection of Mr. Poe's work. Oh, and if I didn't mention, that conference is also free, thanks to the grant from the NEA. So we are having you grace presence throughout the state in October. I'm so thrilled that you're able to do that. And now finally, one thing. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, for about 25 minutes, you have been entertained by Edgar Allan Poe on his 200th birthday. But in truth, for this moment tonight, you have been entertained by an actor by the name of Lou Harmon. Lou, when you walked in here tonight as Edgar Allan Poe, my jaw dropped. I am amazed at what you do. And I know you are going to portray Edgar Allan Poe in Connecticut at the Trail of Terror.
Yes.
Tell us something about, and we only have a minute left. So let me just ask you this. Because you have been personifying Poe, what does that mean to you as an artist?
I want to give him the most honest treatment possible, because in my research of him, I found out that the man has been libeled and slandered for 200 years at this point, and he's given us so much. He's given us horror and mystery and everything else, and I want to give him something back.
Thank you, and we are setting the record straight. So thank you very much, Edgar Allan Poe. Thank you to the Bushnell, to the NEA, to my crew, and I'll say a quick good night, and please do join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.